Peter's married at this time, of course, and the whole company that had shown such an act of politeness to a total stranger. Here I grasped the young lady's hand tightly and said, "Let us all kneel and pray." I instantly dropped on my knees and commenced praying with all the power of soul and body I could command. The young lady tried to get loose from me, but I held her tight. Presently she fell on her knees. Some of the company kneeled, some stood, some fled, some sat still, all looked curious. The fiddler ran off to the kitchen saying, "Lord of mercy, what the matter? What does that mean?" While I prayed, some wept, and wept out loud, and some cried for mercy. I rose from my knees and commenced an exhortation, after which I sang a hymn. The young lady who invited me on the floor lay prostrate, crying earnestly for mercy. I exhorted again, I sang and prayed nearly all night. About 15 of that company professed religion, and our meeting lasted the next day and next night, and as many more were powerfully converted. I organized a society, took 32 into the church, and sent them a preacher. My landlord was appointed leader, a post he held for many years. This was the commencement of a great and glorious revival of religion in that region of the country, and several of the young men converted at this Methodist preacher dance became useful ministers of Jesus Christ. Isn't that powerful stuff? Peter Cartwright. Let's pray. Holy Father, I pray the words of my mouth, the meditation of my heart would be found acceptable unto you, my rock and my redeemer. Today we're looking at the parable of the rich fool. The title is The American Dream. Is it God's dream for you? We've got 4 points that are still in the back of your bulletin if you'd like to fill in the blank. 4 points that spell life. L-I-F-E. The first point, L, is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Actually, I wholeheartedly embrace our Founding Fathers' declaration that we should be free to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. However, as Christians, we must be careful how we define that happiness, which happiness we set out to pursue. We cannot assume that someone else's version of the American dream is God's dream for us. I read an article out of Time magazine by John Meacham entitled "The American Dream, a Perfect Idea for Dark Times." He says, and I quote, "The American dream is one of those phrases that's so familiar that it's borderline embarrassing to realize one doesn't quite know where it came from. Yet there I was a few months ago crossing the border into embarrassment as I realized that I could not recall the etymology of the phrase to mind. The meaning I knew well enough. The future is supposed to be better than the past, and we can make it so by hard work. But the coinage itself was a mystery. And so discovering that it was a product of the early 30s, a time of enormous crisis, was illuminating. The coiner, the historian James Truslow Adams, was writing at a disorienting moment in the years after the crash of 1929, an era in which the future of democratic capitalism was in doubt. That the power and clarity of a phrase that captured so much of what had and has set America apart in terms of liberty and opportunity could come from the gloom of the Great Depression made me feel rather better about things in our own time. He wrote this a few days ago. Here's hoping a dream born in adversity will sustain us through these dispiriting days. And if you get energy from the American dream, and I think it definitely can be sanctified, but it needs to be sanctified, that's wonderful. If you look at the Great Depression, you look at a time similar to the times we've had since 2008 here, where people lost their fortunes. And what happened when they did? I did some research, and not as many people jumped out of windows as the stories were told, but some did. Some did take their lives when they lost everything. And how sad. How sad when that becomes becomes such a huge part of your life, your financial assets, that you would take your life if you lost them. They talked about how Groucho Marx was wiped out in the crash, lost everything. He didn't make his money back, but suffered an emotional breakdown, and had insomnia the rest of his life. And if you're blessed to have done better than your parents financially, that's wonderful. Thank God for it. Remember, to whom much is given, much is required. But you and I need to know that God's dream for us is greater than any rendition of the American dream. We must believe Jesus' words in verse 15, where he says, a person's true life is not made up of the things he owns, no matter how rich he is. We can also say, no matter how poor he or she is. Our second point, to I, is the fill in the blank is greed. Is greed making you miserable? Awesome example that Kay gave us, the monkey trap. At annual conference, there was a neat skit in worship one morning where one of the young ladies, one of the youth, was dressed up as greed. And she kept taking everybody's sunglasses and just anything she could, being very greedy. As Americans, we have to watch out for greed. October 18, 2006, an article from Money Central, when we hit 300 million citizens. At that time, in 2006, we were richer, more comfortable than ever, but still reportedly were dissatisfied. Imagine if they did such a survey today. After the housing bubble burst, the market meltdown, the recession, the jobless recovery, now we have 314 million Americans, and so many out of work. We better not rate our life solely according to our financial situation. In verse 13, a man in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide with me the property our father left us." But Jesus said, that's not my job to get involved in that. But then he went on to say, watch out and guard yourselves from every kind of greed, because your true life is not made up of the things you own. Your true life is not made up of the things you own, no matter how rich you may be. We Americans love our cars. Don't we love our cars? I think of my Buick Century, 2000 Buick Century, and how God has used it to keep me humble. This car, Gigi and I were in an accident in Zanesville. Somebody, to avoid the accident, I ran up against the hill and was determined to be their fault, and that scratched the right side of the car. I run into a couple of different things in parking lots to scratch the car. Then on February 29th, here in town, a rock hit my windshield and my cheek and put some cracks in the windshield. This Buick Century with leather seats, four-way electric seats, air conditioner blows cold on the right and hot on the left. Why? And I can't get it to blow cold to save my life. Why do I keep driving this car? Well, it's very dependable. It always starts, and it also is great at keeping me humble as I ride around in this old Buick. Our third point this morning is very important. Its F is faith is the key. The Bible says that the righteous shall live by faith, because that truly is the only way to live. That's what was missing from the rich man in the parable Jesus is talking about. He said, to remind us of the parable, verse 16, there was once a rich man who had land that bore him good crops. He began to think to himself, I don't have a place to keep all my crops. What can I do? This is what I'll do, he told himself. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones where I'll store the grain and all my other goods. Then I'll say to myself, lucky man, you've all the good things you need for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and enjoy yourself. So his solution to the overabundance of that year was to build bigger barns keep it all for himself, and to retire to a lifestyle of party. Why didn't he think maybe he should give the excess away? Because he was a greedy man. And then Jesus said in the story that God came to him that very night and demanded his life. And he calls him a fool. John Wesley said, make all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. Do you know what the number one worry John Wesley had for Methodists moving forward before he died? His number one worry is that we would become too wealthy and we would go soft as far as God and the gospel was concerned. John Wesley took this very seriously. He never spent more than he earned his first year in ministry. He made a lot more over the years. He sold many books, made a lot of money, and gave it all away to the poor. And when he died, he gave everything away to the poor. The reason why faith is key is because if we have faith that God will supply all of our needs, we won't be tempted to hoard things. Michelle and I have been taking this financial Peace University class every Monday night. And that's one of the ways you can gauge whether you've got greed problems, material problems, is if you're a hoarder. If you have faith, then you don't need to hoard. This is what Jen Hatmaker was talking about in her book, 7. I know some of you have read this. An experimental mutiny against excess. The man in our story had excess and he didn't handle it correctly. He could have given it away. As we look at 7 categories, she lists food, clothes, possessions, media, waste, spending, and stress. If we have too many things in any one category, that puts our lives out of balance, and it can put our checkbook and our finances out of balance as well. I love that Vicki shared in her story of how the MOPS ladies helped that woman, even though they were all ready to go. Jen Hatmaker talks about stress in here in the schedule. If you're always stressed out, whose fault is it? It's our fault if we're always stressed out. If we've got too much schedule, if we're over-scheduled, then we need to cancel a few things, say no to a few things so that we can be present. Media. I talked to my son in the first service. Can you play video games too much? Yes. Can you be on Facebook too much? Yes. If you have too much excess and eats too much into your time, then you're not having the faith that you need for God to handle your life. We'll be looking at this year ahead at 5 practices of successful, I think, or fruitful congregations. The one that we're kind of looking at today is called extravagant generosity. If we avoid excess, it enables us to be much more generous. Let me give you for instance. Michelle was wanting Gigi to have some piano lessons. We wanted a piano for a long time. Pianos are quite expensive, and it's hard to find a good used piano. Well, we got an email from Mid-Ohio District that the retiring pastors from Mount Gilead, the Grahams, were looking to give someone a piano. Michelle and Gigi booked over there as fast as they could and got this piano because the Grahams were getting rid of what was excessive and being extravagantly generous against the piano for free. And there was some other extravagant generosity there when I called Alan Lafferty and asked him to help me to go get the piano. And Dave Roman helped as well. And my neighbor, and then